When you take a look at the upcoming calendar of releases for the Nintendo Switch, you'll notice that, with one very important exception, everything we know about has confirmed hard release dates now that are all before the midpoint of the year. Back during Mario Day last month, we got confirmations for Thousand Year Door as well as Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, both coming out before the end of June. And aside from another Pokemon Legends game coming out next year and the eternal question of what is going on with Metroid Prime 4, there's not a whole lot else on the schedule right now. But something I think is important to note is that when you look at Nintendo the last couple years, particularly post-COVID, they've really been playing a lot more games close to the chest. There are some major titles they've announced maybe a little earlier than they should have that we've waited through news cycles for, but really a lot of titles now have had very short windows of being announced and then being fully released within a 6-month time frame or even shorter. And I think it's very likely that, come summertime during June, we're going to get some announcements for things that are coming out before the end of the year. Now, a more pessimistic mind might be looking at the age of the Switch as well as the impending rumors of some kind of new hardware coming out in early 25 and think, well, because that next-gen system might have been pushed back, Nintendo just might not have anything lined up, and it's going to be a very slow end of year. And while I do think that it is going to be a slower full list of releases for Nintendo, I very heavily doubt that there's going to be nothing first-party-wise in the back half of the year. So I want to take a look at, what franchises haven't been touched on in a little while, what games you've heard rumors about in the past that have yet to surface on the Switch, and just take a look at what I think realistically might release in the back half of this year. Do I think everything we're going to be talking about is coming out all at once? No, absolutely not. But I think that of these games I'm touching on, I feel like some of them have a possibility of existing. Or who knows, maybe I'll look at this video in 6 months and realize not a single one ends up happening. Just how it goes sometimes. First off, just to get an obvious one out of the way, like I mentioned earlier, Metroid Prime 4 is a game that has been known about for quite some time now, and while we have had news in the past in regards to delays, as well as a change in which studio is actually working on it, we know right now that it is Retro Studios, we don't really know much about the actual final version of the game or when it's coming out. And we had some really nice other releases for Metroid happen. We got the remaster of the first Metroid Prime, obviously Metroid Dread was fantastic, and while I think there is also the possibility of other remasters coming out, like Prime 2 and Prime 3, I don't want to fully rule out the idea that Metroid Prime 4 might have a shot at being this holiday season. This is one of those games where I feel like every year that's a discussion point that comes up of just this might be the year we finally get some more info and it fully releases. I mean, it's got to release at some point, right? And particularly looking at how the lifespan of the Switch is beginning to wind down as we get ready for whatever the next thing is, I feel like we're getting close to that push or pull time unless there ends up being some kind of major change like delaying it further and turning it into a next-gen release title. Which is certainly a thing that I've seen some people theorize. I don't think there's really any hard evidence to pull from that other than the fact that, it's been so radio silent for so long, we don't really know what's happening with this game right now. Now, while we're on the subject of Metroid Prime 4, as well as the potential of things like other Metroid Prime remasters, this is actually just, I think, a general field where we could see some more releases happen in the concept of remasters. There are quite a number of titles that have been talked about in the past that could be getting some kind of port job from past systems. Obviously, Nintendo has been loving doing that with the Switch. After all, Thousand Year Door of all games is getting a remaster this year, which is fantastic to hear. And there are other games in the library that could certainly benefit from a similar treatment. And two first-party franchises where I think this makes particularly the most sense are Legend of Zelda and Xenoblade. Starting with Xenoblade, because that's really just the one title at this point, we currently are sitting in a situation where all three mainline games that actually have some degree of connection are all on the Switch library. But one title in particular that is still being left off is Xenoblade Chronicles X, originally released on the Wii U. This is not only the one Xenoblade Chronicles game not on the Switch, it's also one of the very few major Wii U titles that has yet to make its way over to the Switch platform. There has been previous rumors that this is one of the next projects that Monolith is working on. After all, we already know that they are familiar with doing port and remastering work for their own games since we got Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition on the Switch. And while a Wii U game would not need quite as much polishing up as a Wii title, we could still see something in the form of the remaster that, does look a bit better than the original game and visually lines up a little more with what we're seeing from the current mainline trilogy. Now, while it does share the same name as all the other numbered titles, Chronicles X is a bit more of its own standalone thing, unless there's a lot crazier, heavy ways of tying them all together eventually, which I would not put it past Monolith, to be honest. It is an interesting, different title from the other ones, including a fully customizable main character that I think would be wonderful to see get a second chance on the Switch, especially because as far as original titles go that are just completely trapped on that platform goes, that's really the one big one I would love to see escape at this point. Now, on a similar tangent, Legend of Zelda. Obviously, we got a major brand new title release last year with Tears of the Kingdom, and while I wouldn't expect to have any kind of major brand new original title come out for Zelda unless it was some kind of smaller side game or tie-in, something being developed by another company, I do think there is a chance of seeing some kind of port or remaster of some Zelda titles that could release this year. In particular, again, the tangent of the Wii U and what games are still trapped there. There were the HD remakes of both Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. This has been a very long-term demanded and wished-for thing on the Switch, and while I wouldn't say that's necessarily a guarantee, it would be something that I think does have a chance of happening, especially because once you combine what's also available on NSO, that would really complete having a lot of the mainline Zelda titles all on one major current platform, which would be fantastic. I think a slightly more outside chance, though, that I would be very interested in seeing is another remake job similar to what they did with Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, where we take one of the classic top-down 2D ones from handhelds and give it a visual update and change on modern platforms. And while there's a few different 2D Zeldas that could benefit from this, the one I'm really hoping for would be Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons. Now, we did get these released on NSO. There is a way to play these games currently on the platform, but it wouldn't be the first time that Nintendo has made both an original version of the game and a new remastered version available at the same time, especially if the remaster is adding things like additional content or, again, a major visual change. And the Oracle games just have their own handful of interesting, unique aspects and ways of playing with each other that I just think is really neat and would love to see brought back with a fresh coat of paint, especially depicting some of the characters in a new visual style. I don't know if I would necessarily want to see it take on the exact same visual style that we saw with the Link's Awakening remake, but certainly something in that vein of tackling a more unique visual style that maintains the top-down gameplay but adds a 3D element to the visuals. Now, one last game from a remake standpoint of things, at least, that I think also is a possibility, and you've heard rumors off and on about this for quite some time, would be a proper remake of Fire Emblem 4. Fire Emblem is one of the franchises that Nintendo really began heavily leaning more and more into after Awakening was the big success that it was, and we've been seeing fairly regular releases for the franchise, and since the release of Engage early last year, there hasn't been a lot of word yet about what their actual next project is. And one of the things that has been long rumored is that, similar to what they did on the 3DS by remaking Fire Emblem 2 into Shadows of Valentia, we could see a remake happen for Fire Emblem 4, a game that originally never made its way over to the West, though it certainly does have a cult audience out there thanks to things like fan translations. What honestly makes me most intrigued about a release like this happening is that as a longtime Fire Emblem fan, I've enjoyed a lot of the more recent releases, but there's certainly a bit of a difference in tone and writing style, and certainly art style, that we've seen in some of the more recent releases, and when they tap into the older games, there tends to be a little bit more of a tone shift. Shadows of Valentia in particular, I think, offered a different kind of tone story from a lot of later releases, along with an art style that I personally really love. And I think it would be great to see Fire Emblem 4 receive a similar treatment, not only because it's just awesome to see some of the classic games brought back with a fresh coat of paint, but also because, again, this is a game that never actually got officially released in the West before, and while some people have certainly found ways of playing, experiencing, and enjoying them, I would love to see that happen on a more large-scale official form. Now, I know this has been fairly remaster and remake heavy, which honestly I think is something Nintendo would be leaning towards for the last couple releases on the Switch, because as far as whole brand new entries of series go, that would make sense to save for a next generation system. But just to entertain the idea, here's a couple franchises that haven't been touched on in a little while that I think have some degree of chance of happening, or at least could use a new entry by now. As far as one that I think is actually a bit more likely than the others, even though it's not something that I would be personally super excited about, Mario Baseball. Over the course of the Switch's life cycle, we've had a fairly regular, steady release of Mario sports games of various types. We've had strikers, tennis, golf, and as far as the major franchises go that have had multiple entries, baseball is really the one big one left, which hasn't had a new game since Sluggers on the Wii. And then a couple games that I think are very heavy outside chances of happening. This is not something I would put money down on happening this year, but there are a couple major, historically significant Nintendo franchises that haven't had new entries for a while, and I would love to see come back in some form, which are, of course, Donkey Kong and Star Fox. On Donkey Kong's front, we have at least gotten a Switch release in the form of Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, which was a port of a Wii U game that came out back in 2014, so as far as just tracing back from the original release goes, we haven't had a brand new, focused Donkey Kong game in about a decade, and by a similar token, Star Fox, we haven't seen any kind of major new release since Star Fox Zero released on the Wii U back in 2016. These are both franchises I have a lot of love for, and I would love to see Nintendo do something more with them. I feel like at this point in the Switch life cycle, it makes a bit more sense to save, brand new big entries for these for Nintendo's next generation thing. I wouldn't even be shocked if potentially one of them was used as some kind of way of helping to push the launch of a next system. But just looking at, what major franchises and IPs Nintendo has that they haven't been tapping into, it's almost kind of weird to say in some ways that it's now been much longer since a new Donkey Kong or Star Fox game, while Metroid has actually been getting, relatively speaking, actually quite a bit of love this generation, at least by Metroid standards. So those are just some ideas I wanted to share. Again, I think Nintendo's really learned to keep certain things a lot closer to the chest. I mean, even by the fact that there have been so many rumors of their next-gen hardware, and they themselves have not said a single thing yet, and it's something that might be happening within the next year's time. They really have entered a phase, I think, of not wanting to announce stuff until they really know confirmed dates of how the timeline is going and when it's going to release. And so hopefully sometime this summer, I would guess probably around June, we'll get an update from them as far as what other games we can look forward to happening the rest of this year, and just maybe some of the ideas I've talked about here might end up happening. As always, if you enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button, let me know, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you guys later.